All right, why don't we go ahead and get started with introductions, and then we'll get right into the training. So thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned a moment ago, this is track 2, session 2, hosting successful virtual volunteer events. My name is Davis Hahn. I am the field director for Grassroots Democrats HQ. We are a PAC that founded back right after the 2018 midterms with the mission of defending the House, flipping the Senate, and taking back the White House. No small task, but we're working tirelessly day and night to make it happen. And I'm joined today by Karla. Karla, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Karla. I am the Spanish Film Bank Coordinator at the Grassroots Democrats HQ. And yeah, I'm originally from Los Angeles. Right now I'm studying in Wisconsin, so that's why it's kind of dark because there's no sun. But yes, I'm very excited to be with you all today and sharing how to host successful virtual volunteer events.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll just go ahead and give you a roadmap of what today's presentation is going to look like. We're going to discuss why we're going virtual, which I think we know the answer why, but more so the importance and the key objectives of moving our volunteer events from being in person to online events. We'll discuss the roles and responsibilities of virtual event leaders, scheduling virtual events, recruiting volunteers to attend your events, pre-event preparation, everything that you need to do to make sure that that event is welcoming to folks and successful, how to actually host the event on the day of, as well as following up with your volunteers afterwards to keep them engaged. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about some specifics for the different types of virtual volunteer events you might be hosting, the 3 main ones being virtual phone banks, virtual text banks, and virtual postcard writing parties. So I'm going to first give us just an overview of the transition to virtual volunteer events. So our entire goal when you're hosting a virtual volunteer event is to create a virtual environment that has the same camaraderie, community, resources as a campaign office. And why is that? Volunteers come for the cause, but they stay for the relationships. And that's really something that you have to remember if you're a group leader or if you're an organizer who was just hired by a campaign. That is the central tenet of political organizing, is building relationships with people. That's what will make them keep coming back, keep making those calls, keep sending those texts. And one of the great things about a campaign office is that it's always a fun environment. You get to meet new people. You get this sense of community as you're sitting there making calls with each other, sending texts with each other. And it's unfortunate that we lose a little bit of that because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But our entire goal is to recreate as much of it as we possibly can in a virtual platform to essentially bring the campaign office online. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The different ways of making sure that that happens. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Karla, who's going to talk a little bit about the different roles and responsibilities of virtual event leaders.
Okay, so to talk about roles and responsibilities, of course, this isn't a just random collection of people that are coming together for a cause. There is one person, at least one person, and an entire team behind this person leading these events. So the roles and responsibilities of the main person within an event is for them to be the cheerleader, teacher, party planner, and the support figure for the event. They establish the standards and goals for everybody, as well as making the event enjoyable and making sure that everybody has what they need in order to be successful during these events. They also choose the campaigns and methods of voter contact that make the greatest impact. Other roles and responsibilities are, well, there may be 2 people within the room if the room is big enough. So the event captain is the person who greets the event attendees and leads the icebreakers. They say hello to everybody in the room. They are welcoming, they are warm. They also provide background about the candidate and why we are volunteering. They will train event attendees and teach them the necessary skills that they may need within the entire session. And then their partner in crime, of course, depending on the size, will back them up by answering questions in the chat and posting relevant links in the chat and so on. And now we'll talk about scheduling. So during COVID-19, there's no more physical barrier, which is unfortunate, but very easy for us to create schedules that work around other people's work lives. So people are more reachable and online more than ever. So now it's easier to pick a date and time when you can spend 2 or more hours, usually Monday through Thursday in the evenings or Saturday, Sunday in the afternoons are the most effective times to reach voters and callers, especially because everybody is going back to work or they are attending school. So we should set a date at least a week in advance to give people the chance to fit these events into their schedules. And a pro tip is adding a second date a few days or a few weeks later so that people have scheduling options. This gives them the option to either attend your first event, or if they can't, they can see that there is another event, and this will increase the chances of people being able to make at least one of them, and of course doubles the impact that we are making for the campaigns.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit now about how to recruit volunteers for your event. So just a little bit of a bird's eye overview. If you're doing a small event, if it's just you and some friends that you're going to invite in your personal network, you're just going to need to, that folks can RSVP via email or text directly to you. And then you can send them back all the information that they're going to need for that call. So the date and the time and the Zoom link. If you're doing a larger event, we really recommend using a platform like Mobilize America or Action Network. And these are platforms that up until a certain number of events you can use for free. And why you want to use these events is just because it makes your life a lot easier when you're coordinating a volunteer event. Mobilize America and Action Network, they both collect the information from your volunteers, such as their contact information, and they do send automated confirmation emails that can include the Zoom link and instructions for joining the call. It's preferable to creating a Facebook event, which a lot of group leaders will often try and do, because Facebook does not collect contact information from your volunteers, and it also does not have the ability to send them confirmation and reminder emails with all of the instructions that they will need to actually join you. When you're trying to get more people to sign up for your event, the first thing to do is start with relational organizing. What is relational organizing? That is using the power of your personal contacts, going through your contacts on your phone, going through your followers on social media, people that you know, if they will join you as your friend for this event that you're doing. So look through those contacts, followers, anyone you know who is interested in politics, that you know they care about a certain issue or they care about this country. Start by sending them a text, an email, or a direct message on social media, inviting them to join you. And for every friend who says yes, don't just say, great, I'll see you at this time. Say, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, can you invite 3 more people? This is when we do this with voters, we call it vote tripling. Here, I guess we would call it volunteer tripling. It exponentially reaches your outreach if then you put some of the recruitment tasks on each person who says that they're going to RSVP and show up. Social media is obviously a very important tool for promoting volunteer events and promoting ways to get involved on political campaigns. So I just want to go over some of the best practices for using social media to do that. And the platforms that you're primarily going to use are, I would think, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I personally have not used TikTok to try and recruit anyone to come volunteer, but if somebody has some best practices for that, go ahead and drop it in the chat. But number one best practice, figure out who your like-minded followers are. And kind of what I was just saying a minute ago, don't just invite them to attend, DM them, ask them if they'll tweet or share out your event and your RSVP link. If you post on Instagram, as I'm sure most of you know, when you post on Instagram, you cannot put a URL in your bio or in your caption for a picture. And unless you're verified, you cannot put a URL in your story. either. So if you post about your event on Instagram, always put the RSVP link in your bio. And in that story post or in that caption on your regular post, make sure to note that folks can look at your bio to find the link to RSVP. Don't be afraid to use Facebook. I know it seems like most young people don't use Facebook anymore now that their parents figured out how to use it. But in actuality, there still are quite a bit of young people on Facebook, and particularly in political organizing. It is still a very powerful tool for getting like-minded people with interests and passions in politics together. And one of the reasons for that is because there are so many Facebook groups of like-minded people that have come together. So look for those groups, those volunteer-run groups, those grassroots groups that have a similar mission to the cause that you're supporting. Join them, and that's an incredible place for you to share out any events that you're hosting and get more RSVPs. And create a Facebook event. Don't use it to collect your RSVPs, but create that event to help get the word out. Send an invitation. You can go through your friend list and invite a ton of people with a click. It takes 30 seconds. Send those invitations out. Just always make sure that you're including the RSVP link in the description, so volunteers will come back to your email, or they'll come back to your Mobilize America or Action Network event, so that you're actually getting their contact info and have an ability to follow up with them later. Use graphics. If you're making a Facebook event, you want a nice looking Facebook event cover. Make a graphic for your event and include that picture when you tweet about it or put it on your Instagram. Those visuals are going to grab the attention of potential volunteers more, and it makes what you're doing look more professional. Canva is a tool that you can use for free to pretty easily make professional looking graphics. They have hundreds upon thousands of templates that you can choose from. You don't need an ounce of knowledge of Photoshop or graphic design to be able to do it. I personally use Canva to make graphics for a lot of the events that I host for political campaigns. So don't be afraid to do that. It's not as difficult as it would seem, and it's really important for grabbing the attention of volunteers on social media and making your event look more professional. And don't be afraid to use your stories. And don't limit that to Instagram and Snapchat. Facebook has stories too. So does LinkedIn even. And LinkedIn can be a way to find other like-minded people who are looking to get involved in politics as well. So use stories on all those different platforms. It's just an extra way to get the word out and get more people looking at what you're doing. Email lists are a very important part of political organizing, and particularly for volunteer recruitment. If you're hosting regular events, make sure you start a mailing list so you can keep your network of volunteers constantly in the loop about what you're doing. Platforms like MailChimp and Action Network will allow you to do this for free up to a certain number of subscribers. With MailChimp, I think it's up to 500 emails. I'm not sure what the number of Action Network is, but it's in the similar ballpark. And send regular weekly newsletters or email blasts to those people, not only talking about these are the ways you can get involved right away in the next week, but here are some highlights from the past week. Here's what you might have missed out on. One of our best tools in organizing and in virtual recruitment is what you might have heard referred to as FOMO, or fear of missing out. If you include those pictures showing you and all your volunteers having a great time while making a difference, other volunteers are going to see that and they're going to think, oh, I wish I was there. I'm going to sign up for an upcoming shift. And reach out to other grassroots groups or volunteer leaders. If you know another friend who has a mailing list and they're hosting regular events, ask them to share your events as well. Reach out to your local Indivisible or Swing Left or Young Dems group or College Dems group and ask for their help in promoting your event. It's always a good idea to ask for help. Political organizing is all about partnership. And remember, after every single event, every single shift, keep track of everyone who attended and make sure to add them to your mailing list in your volunteer database after that, so you'll be able to follow up with them, reach out to them again, and invite them to come back. So obviously, a lot of these events that we're doing are going to be for phone banking, but there's a little bit of a spin on that, and what I like to call, what some people call phone banking for phone bankers. I like to call friend banking. Do not underestimate the power of making phone calls when you're recruiting volunteers to come to your events. Make phone calls to anyone in your contacts who you think might be interested in joining. Make phone calls to everyone on your list of people who have indicated they're interested in volunteering or they've signed up for a shift in the past. And then if they don't answer, send a text them to follow up. Why is this important? People respond to direct personal conversations much more than just an email or another form of indirect contact. It's why we're emphasizing phone banking so much. It's the same thing when we're talking to voters. We're much more likely to mobilize someone to go to the polls if we have a one-on-one person-to-person conversation with them. And the same principle applies when we're recruiting volunteers and trying to get them to sign up for a shift. And I mean, let's be honest, it's much harder for somebody to say no when they're actually talking to you on the phone. So they feel more pressure, not that we're trying to pressure people into doing something, but they feel more pressure and I think more of that fear of missing out when they're actually having a one-on-one conversation with you. And always employ a hard ask in your calls. This part is really important. And because of that, I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what is a hard ask. One of the key principles of political organizing is that you get what you ask for and not much of what you don't. And what does that mean? It means that you want to be very specific in the way that you're asking volunteers to join your event. So the first thing that you want to do is build urgency, convey what is in it for the volunteer, what's at stake in this election, why is the activity that you're doing important, and why are we doing it right now? Why is it urgent? Why can't it wait until later? So, if you're reaching out to a volunteer, you'll probably say, there are only 50 days left in the election. We know we can't let Trump and Mitch McConnell get reelected if we want to make progress on climate change, if we want to recover from COVID-19. And voters have already started to receive their mail ballots. So we need to be calling them now to make sure that they cast that ballot on time so their vote is actually counted. Build that context for the volunteer. Ask for something specific. This is what I mean when I say you get what you ask for and not much of what you don't. And what you want to do is use either or questions to avoid giving an easy out to the person that you're talking to. Instead of saying, we're having several phone banks over the next 2 weeks, when can you join us? That gives them an easy out. That gives the volunteer an easy way to say, oh, I'm just too busy. I don't think I can right now. Instead, you want to frame the question, we have a couple of phone banks coming up. Does Saturday at noon or Sunday at 3 p.m. work better for you to join us? That direct question, you're asking them to sign up for a specific shift. I know it might seem harsh or uncomfortable if you haven't made these kind of calls before, but that is the core tenet of a hard ask. And I guarantee you there's plenty of research behind it. And I have plenty of anecdotal evidence to back it up. It's much more effective than just asking a vague, for a very vague commitment. Ask, shut up, and then listen. Don't talk over the other person. Once you've made your ask, listen to their response. Give them a chance to say, yes, I'd love to join, or maybe if they're on the fence about it, I don't know if I have time. Listen to what their response is and really engage with that and think about the best way to then follow up with them. And of course, be persistent. 90% of organizing is all in the follow-up. You're going to get a lot of no's or maybes at first, and it takes persistence to turn those no's and maybes into yeses. It's the principle we use when we're talking to voters, and it definitely applies to talking to volunteers as well. So always have a secondary ask. Say, if you're asking someone, can you join us to phone bank on Saturday at noon? And they say, no, I'm really busy. Say, well, we also have one on every Thursday night at 6 p.m. Would that work better for you? Always have a backup ask. Again, it puts more pressure on the other person to actually say yes, and it doesn't give them an easy out. Maybe they say, oh, I don't really want to make phone calls. Then offer them texting. Offer them another activity where they can still join you and make a difference. Always have that secondary ask. As I said, so much of organizing is about following up and being persistent. All right, I'm going to kick it back to Karla now because I think you've all heard me talk a little too much for the time being, and she's going to talk about how to prepare for your event beforehand.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the event itself. And over here at the Grassroots Democrats, we like to use Zoom to create the calls and the community events. So we create a separate Zoom link for each event, and we recommend investing in a Zoom Pro account, which is $14.99 a month. And this is just because the regular Zoom account only allows you to do 40-minute calls at a time. And I'm sure that that would be really annoying when you're trying to host a 2-hour event, if you're trying to hop in and out of Zoom rooms, and you would lose a lot of people. And some of our recommended settings is that you enable a waiting room. And this is just so that you can pre-screen the different participants and helps keep from having random people hop into your Zoom room and try to hinder all the work that you're doing. And we have a lot of people from different parts of the country. I know I've had a lot of volunteers from DC, from California, from Wisconsin. You never know who's going to be in your Zoom room, so it's just smart to enable a waiting room and see who's going to hop in. Also, we ask people to show their faces. We ask people to show their faces for the same reason, for safety, and also because we want to build community. So we want to see everybody's beautiful face and everybody happy to volunteer for that day. We also offer the option of selecting both telephone and computer audio, because sometimes people do have technical difficulties and they cannot use their computer audio, so they can just hop in and dial in with their phone. Next, we will be talking about participant outreach. So we send confirmation emails or texts with the relevant information before the event. So we send the Zoom link, if applicable, or any important links that they may need during the session. We also include the time zone, because if you're trying to do something on Pacific time, but somebody's on the East, they may get it confused and miss the event completely. We also list the materials. So for our virtual phone banks, we say, bring your phone, bring a drink, bring your laptop, bring some coffee, and stuff like that. And also share your contact info so that participants can reach out with questions. We tend to send out emails right before the event with our email as well as our phone number. And I know that there's sometimes people text me and say, oh, I need the link, or, oh, I'm having issues, I'm going to hop in late, just so they let you know what's going on. And also share your excitement in the emails. I know we're all excited to get started, to get volunteering, to get people organized, and people can read that through the emails. Just show your enthusiasm. And then, of course, send a final reminder, email or text 30 to 60 minutes before the event begins, because we all have very busy lives. And so we can forget that we have an event coming up, and it just helps remind us that we have an event coming up. So we should send out the reminder email. Now I'll pass it back to Davis for hosting.
Thank you, Karla. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of actually hosting an event once it begins. You always, of course, want to be welcoming. You want to start the event by welcoming your volunteers and introducing yourself. Talk about who you are and why you decided to host this event. Then if you're a smaller group, go around on the Zoom call and allow each person to introduce themselves. Ask them to share where they're calling in from and talk about why they're volunteering, why they're excited to work on this activity for this candidate or campaign. If you're in a larger group, you can ask your volunteers to do this in the chat. And there are two reasons that we want to focus on these introductions. One, they create a great sense of community among volunteers. Given that we're social distancing and don't get to see people in person as much, it's important to give folks an opportunity to socialize as much as possible. It's going to build that sense of community, camaraderie. It's going to make people way more likely to come back and attend your next shift. But it also gives volunteers extra time to get onto the call before you start training. I think we're all on Zoom calls like 24 hours a day these days, and a lot of them run late. So a lot of times when I'm hosting an event, it takes 5 to 10 minutes for every volunteer to get through that virtual door and get on. So you don't want to start training right away once the event starts. You want to give a little bit of extra time so that everyone gets on and that nobody misses any of the really important information that they're going to need to be successful. Next is the training, and this is the most important part of what you're going to be doing as a host. And there are a lot of important points that you want to include when you're training your volunteers. Include the big picture. Why are we volunteering? This might seem like a very self-explanatory question or a very self-explanatory point, but relate it back to your story and then put it in the greater context of our political environment. So why are we volunteering? This election is so important for these issues, what your audience is, and the election is 50 days away. We clearly need to take back the White House. We need to flip the Senate. Whatever that big picture is, make sure to put that into perspective for the volunteers. Then move to the small picture. Given this is why we're volunteering, why are we working on this campaign, working in this state or district, and why are we doing this activity to make that change happen? So let's say I'm leading a phone bank for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. I'll say, obviously, we're volunteering because we want to win back the White House. Why are we calling into Pennsylvania? Well, we're making calls because it's the most effective way to reach out to voters during the pandemic. We're calling into Pennsylvania because it's one of the 6 states that's going to decide the Electoral College, and it was one of 3 states that Trump narrowly won in 2016 that gave him the presidency. If we win back Pennsylvania this cycle, it's going to be very unlikely that Donald Trump is going to be able to win re-election. So that's why we're getting voters out to the polls in this state in particular. That's an example of how you'll paint the smaller picture for your volunteers. Then you want to obviously show them how to use whatever the tool is that you're using. So if you're making calls, share your screen, walk them through how to use the virtual phone bank, or use a training deck if the campaign provided you with one. Same thing with a text bank. Whether you're doing it on an app or if you're doing it through your computer, make sure you walk your volunteers through how to use every feature of that platform so that they're going to be successful once they start making calls or sending texts or whatever other activity that you're focusing on. Talk with them about how to talk to voters, how to have effective conversations with voters. So emphasizing, find an issue that matters to you and how that relates to your personal story. And that's the best way to have a persuasive conversation with the voter. This is how you should answer if you get this question from a voter. Go over some of those key points of how to have a successful conversation and how to use the script effectively, and then give your volunteers to ask any questions that they might have about that process as well. Always emphasize to your volunteers that we are always positive, respectful, and polite, even if we're dealing with rude people on the other end of the phone. And then set expectations. This is a very important one. Remind people that every conversation we have has an impact. Volunteers will often feel frustrated or disheartened if they don't reach a supporter every call or every text that they send. But the fact of the matter is, this is still incredibly important and they're still making a difference, even if they only have a handful of conversations. The number of voters that we talk to is often a matter of luck, and every conversation matters. Even if we're cleaning out bad numbers from the list, that's still really important work. So make sure to set those expectations. Some of your volunteers will have a great session. They'll talk to 10, 15 people. Others might have gotten really unlucky and they only got a couple conversations, but every conversation matters because this election is going to be so close. So make sure to remind your volunteers of that at the end of your training. And be patient with people who are new and expect to do tech support. If you're hosting an event with younger people, you're not going to have to do as much of what I have to do when I host a phone bank session, which is teach people how to use their web browser and how to use Zoom. But that being said, someone still might have technical difficulties, and be prepared to be patient with them and help try and work them through it to the best of your abilities. Breakout rooms in Zoom are a very effective tool to use when you're hosting larger events. When you're doing the training at the beginning, you will inevitably have some folks who know what they're doing and they're ready to get started, and then other people who are newer and need more attention. So a good practice is to open a breakout room, move everyone who needs training into a breakout room with one event leader, and the other event leader stays in the main room, and while the volunteers who know what they're doing can get started and just ask questions as needed. That way you're not making experienced volunteers sit through a full training again when they don't need it. That is something that can deter them from wanting to come back to future shifts. And then just some final tips and best practices for hosting the event. Always take a group picture and share on social media. You've heard me talk about fear of missing out now several times, but it is a real thing. And sharing pictures of what you're doing and having a good time while you're doing it is one of the best ways to get more people interested and keep volunteers coming back. Encourage your folks to stay on the Zoom call for the duration of the shift. This allows you to answer their questions and give them support in real time. And it also allows volunteers to share their experiences and have that sense of being in a virtual campaign office and have that experience that they would have if we were doing this together in person. If you're phone banking, volunteers can stay on the Zoom call without hearing background conversations or disrupting anyone else by clicking the leave computer audio function, and then they'll just join the audio again if they have something they want to share or a question that they want to ask. And then always invite your volunteers to come back to the Zoom call and come back together as a group about 15 minutes before the shift ends. You want to do this for a couple reasons. As I mentioned before, always give your folks an opportunity to share their feedback, talk about their experiences. Volunteers love doing this, and it's really important for them to be able to do that since we're not in a campaign office. That's one of the best ways to keep them, feeling good about what they're doing, socialize with other volunteers, build that sense of community that we need to keep folks coming back every shift. And this also gives you an opportunity to remind them about your upcoming events and invite them to join you. So always come back for that debrief at the end. And now I'll kick it back over to Karla, who's going to talk about following up with folks after your shift.
Okay, so your virtual event just ended, but your job as a host is not done. So after the event, you want to make sure that you email your attendees and thank them for their hard work. We want to show our appreciation for all of our volunteers because that's what keeps them coming, and that is what builds the community that we want to create. And also ask for feedback. As hosts, we are not perfect. We always want we always want to develop our skills, so we gladly take feedback and then invite them to join future events. Maybe they're interested in writing, maybe they're interested in text banking. Make sure that you follow up with them and let them know all the opportunities that are available if they are interested in joining. And also email anybody who RSVP'd but didn't show up and ask them to come to another event. This is part of the community building. You want to check in on your volunteers and make sure that they are all right, make sure that they have everything that they need in order to make a difference, and ask them to join other events. And then, take a moment to celebrate your success. You're making such a big difference. You put in all the hard work, you organized people, and you did what you came to do. So take a moment and celebrate your success.
All right, so now just some individual tips about the different types of events that you might be hosting. And we've gone over a lot of these already, but they're just really important to reiterate. Obviously, we want to focus a lot on phone banking and hosting virtual phone banks because that is the new canvassing. That is the way for us to have one-on-one personal conversations with voters in the COVID era. Phone banking is really the only platform that allows us to continue to do that just as if we were knocking on doors. It's just done over the phone. As I mentioned before, teach volunteers to leave their computer audio so they can stay on the Zoom call even while they're making their calls. And even if someone says, no, I'd rather just get off the Zoom call, really try and get them to come back to that debrief session at the end of the event. And lastly, again, end every event by letting everyone share their experiences and build that sense of community, build that sense of a virtual campaign office. And then back to Karla for text banking.
So in the COVID era and the technology, text banking is extremely important. I know that a lot of people tend to look at their texts a little more than they are to pick up their phone calls. And so be careful to only use this in the campaign cycle where it is most effective. In order to be efficient, upload your volunteers to the texting platform before the session begins so that you can optimize the entire hour that you are going to use to text people, and then also remain on the call with volunteers to answer any questions and, of course, create the community that we want and ensure that volunteers properly tag voters and send responses.
And then lastly, this is a type of event that we're really going to be phasing out over the next couple weeks because it's getting late in the cycle to be sending postcards to voters. But that being said, you might want to host a postcard party with some of your friends. And this just allows you to write postcards together, hang out on a Zoom call, enjoy each other's conversation. If you're the shift leader for one of these events, though, it's your job to communicate to your volunteers the supplies that they will need. So obviously they will need postcards, they'll need a list of addresses, and they'll need a script. You can also obtain the addresses and the scripts for them and then just distribute it to your volunteers when you're on the call with them. But you should be prepared to, act as a host and provide some kind of activities or topics of conversation to be able to pass the time while you're all getting together to do this activity. And lastly, we want to remind you guys that volunteers come for the cause and stay for the relationships. And that's the most important aspect of organizing these virtual volunteer events. And that is the most important aspect, really, of just political organizing in general. People will come, they will show up once because they want to make a difference. They're not going to come back unless you make it a good and inviting time for them. So we'd love to open it up to any questions. And I will also just mention that Karla and I both, as we mentioned earlier, work for Grassroots Democrats HQ. We have a ton of these virtual events happening all the time. And if you would like to join one and see how it's done before hosting your own, you can find dozens of them on our website, which is grassrootsdems.org. But now I'd just love to open it up to any questions. So if you have them, feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat. And if not, that's okay too. That means that we did a really good job, hopefully. And one thing that I will drop into the chat as well is that we do have a list of upcoming calls to action. If maybe you want to start off by just joining pre-scheduled events and joining as a volunteer to just make calls or send texts. We have a bunch of calls to action, many of them hosted by Grassroots Democrats HQ and some of them hosted by some of our other awesome partner organizations that help to put on this conference. So you can find those by clicking on the link that I just put into the chat as well.